In the heart of an empire that stretched across continents, there were men who became more than soldiers, more than killers. They became living nightmares. Their names were whispered in taverns carved into stone and feared even in the highest halls of power. These were not mere warriors. They were predators, forged in blood, bound by honor, and unleashed upon the ancient world with ruthless precision. In the shadow of Rome's glory, they carried death in their hands and legends in their wake. These are the most feared warriors of ancient Rome. Beneath the marble grandeur of Rome, behind the golden statues and towering pillars, there existed a world soaked in blood, a world where men were not born but forged. Here in the underground barracks beneath the Colosseum, the most feared killers of the ancient world sharpened their blades and prepared to die. They were called gladiators, but they were far more than entertainers. They were weapons. Dragged from distant lands, taken as slaves, criminals and prisoners of war, these men were stripped of their past, their names erased, their humanity crushed beneath Roman boots. What remained was something new, something deadly, beasts trained to kill for the amusement of an empire. In the dim light of the ludus, the gladiator schools, the air reeked of sweat, iron and fear. Wooden swords slammed against shields. The relentless doctors, their brutal trainers, barked commands. Every mistake was punished, every weakness exploited. Survival depended on one thing: learning to become a predator. But to make no mistake, these men did not simply fight, they performed death. When the gates of the Colosseum opened, and the roar of 50,000 Roman voices shook the very earth, a gladiator stepped into an arena where one truth reigned above all: kill or be killed. Imagine standing there, the scorching sun blinding your eyes, the sand hot beneath your bare feet, the stench of blood thick in the air. Across from you stands another warrior, a stranger whose only purpose in life mirrors your own: to end you. The crowd screams for blood. The emperor watches from above, his thumb poised to decide your fate. Your heart pounds, your grip tightens, and in that single breath before battle begins, you accept death. And then chaos erupts. The clash of steel, the thunder of shields, the guttural cries of men fighting for survival. Every strike, every parry, every gasp of breath is magnified beneath the deafening roar of the Roman mob. Blood stains the sand, bones break beneath heavy blades, and yet the gladiator fights on. Because to stop, even for an instant, is to die. But not all who entered the arena perished. Some rose higher, becoming legends etched into Rome's eternal memory. Men like Spartacus, once a slave, who defied his captors and led the largest uprising against the empire. Or Flamma, the Syrian warrior who fought 34 battles and was offered freedom 4 times, yet refused, choosing instead to remain in the arena where death had become his home. These men were not born heroes. Rome made them into monsters, and the crowd adored them for it. The greater the bloodshed, the louder the cheers. The more savage the kill, the higher the glory. Gladiators lived on the knife's edge between death and immortality, and the people of Rome fed on the spectacle like starving wolves, yet behind the cheers lay horror. For every victor, a dozen corpses rotted beneath the arena sands. For every celebrated champion, countless nameless warriors died screaming, their blood forgotten as quickly as it spilled. Rome feasted on violence. It was an addiction, a hunger that could never be satisfied. And so the cycle continued. When slaves arrived, new fighters were trained. The empire's heart beat to the rhythm of combat. To be a gladiator was to live in a world where freedom was a dream, where dignity was stripped away, and where every breath might be your last. Yet for those who endured, for those who survived, glory awaited. They became more than men. They became symbols of fear, power, and defiance. And so, beneath the deafening roar of Rome's greatest arena, the most feared warriors of the empire fought, not just for survival, but for a name that would outlive death itself. In the vast empire of Rome, power was everything. And even the mightiest emperor knew that a single blade drawn in silence could end his reign before dawn. To survive, Rome's rulers created something terrifying, an army hidden in plain sight. A force so loyal, so ruthless, and so feared. They were the Praetorian Guards, the emperor's shield, his sword, and sometimes his executioners. Unlike the common legionary, the Praetorians were chosen from the finest warriors across the empire. Their selection was merciless. Only the strongest, fastest, and most cunning survived the trials. Every strike they learned, every tactic they mastered, was designed for one purpose: to protect Rome's heart and control it. Their armor shone brighter than gold, their spears polished to perfection, their plumes rising high above the battlefield. To see a Praetorian march was to witness discipline carved into flesh. But behind the elegance lay ruthless efficiency. These men killed without hesitation, without remorse, and without question. By day they guarded the emperor's palaces, their polished shields reflecting the marble halls of power. By night they became whispers in the dark. Moving like shadows, they crushed rebellions before they began, silenced dissenters, and eliminated any who dared to threaten the throne. Rome slept peacefully because the Praetorians never did, but loyalty came at a price. With time, the Praetorian Guard grew too powerful, feared not only by Rome's enemies, but by its rulers themselves. The same hands that swore to protect began to decide who lived and who died. In the chaos of succession, emperors rose and fell at their command. It was the Praetorians who declared Claudius emperor after Caligula's assassination. It was the Praetorians who betrayed their oaths when Pertinax refused to pay their price, storming the palace and cutting him down where he stood. And then came the darkest chapter of all. In 193 AD, after the murder of Emperor Pertinax, the Praetorians did the unthinkable. They auctioned the throne of Rome to the highest bidder, selling the empire itself like common goods in the marketplace. When Didius Julianus offered the largest bribe, they hailed him emperor, only for him to be executed weeks later when a rival army marched on the city. This was no longer loyalty. This was power weaponized. And yet, despite their corruption, the Praetorian Guard remained the most feared military force within Rome's borders. Their presence alone was enough to silence senators, crush uprisings, and strike terror into the hearts of Rome's enemies. Wherever they marched, death followed. For centuries, they stood as the emperor's most trusted and most dangerous. To earn their black cloak and golden crest was to join an elite brotherhood whose name alone commanded respect and dread alike. But in the end, power devours itself. By 312 AD, the Praetorians had become so uncontrollable, so feared, that Emperor Constantine had no choice but to destroy them. At the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, their ranks were shattered, their barracks burned, their power erased from history. Yet even in death their shadow lingers. For in the heart of Rome, behind the glittering marble and beneath the imperial throne, the Praetorian Guard taught a lesson carved in blood. In the empire's darkest corridors, the most feared warriors are not those who fight the fate of kings. Before the roar of the Colosseum, before the whispers of assassins in Rome's shadows, there was the thunder of iron-shod sandals crushing the earth beneath them. They were the legionaries, the beating heart of Rome's power, more than men, more than warriors. They were the unbreakable wall upon which empires shattered. When the eagle standards of Rome were raised, entire nations trembled. Across deserts, mountains, forests, and rivers, the Roman legions advanced like a storm consuming the horizon, unstoppable, relentless, merciless. To face them was not to fight an army. It was to stand against a machine of war unlike anything the ancient world had ever known. Every legionary was forged in fire. From the moment they swore their oath, sacramentum, they ceased to be free men. Their lives no longer belonged to them. They belonged to Rome. The training was brutal. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, and weakness was crushed beneath the lash of discipline. Legionaries marched 25 miles a day carrying weapons, shields, rations, and armor weighing over 40 kilograms. They built roads, raised fortresses, and dug trenches under the burning sun, their muscles hardened like iron, their minds sharpened like blades. But their true strength was not in their swords. It was in their unity. The legion did not fight as individuals. It moved as one, a living organism of flesh and steel. Each man's life depended on the man beside him. Shields locked together, spears thrust forward, orders shouted, obeyed, and executed without hesitation. And then there was the testudo, the legendary tortoise formation. When the enemy's arrows darkened the skies, the legionaries raised their shields in perfect unison, creating an impenetrable wall of iron. It was discipline made visible, a fortress carried on their backs, advancing step by step until the enemy's defenses shattered before them. But discipline alone did not make them feared. It was their resolve. The legions did not retreat. They did not break. Even when outnumbered, even when surrounded, they fought until the ground beneath them was soaked red. To surrender was dishonor, to flee was death. And yet, behind the perfection of the legions lay ruthless. They left scorched earth in their wake. Cities that resisted Rome were crushed without mercy, their people slaughtered or enslaved. The name of Rome became a warning carved into the ruins of fallen kingdoms. Among their ranks, centurions ruled with iron fists, commanders forged in blood and fire. They carried the scars of 100 battles, and their very presence demanded obedience. Their vine staff struck down hesitation, weakness, and fear alike. Under their watch, the legions became more than an army. They became a force of nature. But glory had a price. In the frozen forests of Teutoburg, 3 entire Roman legions were annihilated. Over 20,000 soldiers cut down, their eagle standards captured, their bones left to rot beneath the trees. Rome had never known defeat like this, and yet from the ashes it rebuilt, trained harder, fought fiercer, and returned with vengeance. That was the true power of the Roman legionary. Not just strength, not just discipline, but an unyielding will, refusal to bow no matter the cost. For centuries, the legionaries carried Rome's banner across 3 continents. They carved roads through mountains, raised monuments to their victories, and buried their enemies beneath the weight of their formations. To face them was to face the embodiment of Roman supremacy. And even now, 2,000 years later, their name commands respect and fear. For when the legion marched, it was not an army that came for you. It was Rome itself, and Rome was unstoppable. In the glittering heart of the Roman Empire, where marble palaces touched the sky and senators debated beneath golden domes, Rome believed itself untouchable, eternal. But in the narrow alleys, hidden markets, and shadowed streets of Judea, a different kind of warrior walked unseen, not soldiers. Not gladiators, not men seeking honor or glory. These were the Sicarii, killers without banners, assassins without mercy, and to those who crossed their path, they were death itself. Their name came from the small curved dagger they carried, the Sica, a blade short enough to hide beneath their robes, and swift enough to disappear before the victim's body. It was their signature, their silent promise, and their mark of terror. The Sicarii were born from resistance, a rebellion against Rome's iron grip on the provinces. Yeah. But make no mistake, they were not soldiers fighting in open battle. They were phantoms, masters of disguise. They slipped through crowded marketplaces, mingling with citizens and merchants, priests and beggars, until the moment they struck. A flash of steel, a muffled scream, a body collapsing into the dust, and then nothing. By the time Rome's guards arrived, the Sicarii were gone, vanished like smoke into the chaos of the streets. No witnesses, no footprints, no mercy. Their targets were carefully chosen. Roman officials, tax collectors, collaborators, and anyone seen as a traitor to their cause. But their assassinations were never quiet for long, because the message they carried echoed louder than any battle cry. The Sicarius dagger was more than a weapon. It was psychological warfare. Panic spread like wildfire. Every Roman officer looked over his shoulder. Every local governor traveled with twice as many guards. Markets, once buzzing with life, became nests of suspicion and fear. Anyone could be a Sicarius. The old man at the fruit stall, the boy delivering water, the woman carrying clay pots. Every shadow hid an executioner. Rome, the empire that conquered continents, that crushed armies, that ruled through power and fear, turned against itself. And yet, the Sicarii were not united by greed, nor loyalty, nor even survival. They were fueled by faith and vengeance, convinced they were chosen to deliver divine justice, no matter the cost. They fought not only against Rome people if they were seen as collaborators. It was terror at its purest form. But Rome never tolerated defiance for long. In 73 CE, at a stone fortress called Masada, the Sicarii made their final stand. Trapped by the Roman legions, hopelessly outnumbered, they faced the inevitable, slavery or death. They chose death. Over 960 men, women and children took their own lives rather than kneel before the empire they despised. To the Romans, they were rebels crushed beneath the weight of imperial power. But to history, they became something far more haunting. A reminder that not all battles are fought in the open, and not all warriors fight for glory. The Sicarii were the silent heartbeat of resistance, ghosts carved into the walls of time. They left no banners, no monuments, no grand speeches, only fear. Fear in the streets, fear in the palaces, fear in the very heart of an empire that thought itself invincible. And though their bodies turned to dust beneath the desert sun, their legend endured. Because in Rome's darkest nights, whispers still told of killers who walked without sound, struck without warning, and vanished without a trace. They were the Sicarii, and they taught the empire a lesson it would never forget. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one you never see coming. On the blood-soaked fields of the ancient world, beneath the banners of the Roman eagle, there walked men who were neither kings nor emperors, yet their authority was absolute. They were the Centurions, the iron backbone of Rome's legions. For every 1,000 soldiers there stood one centurion. He was not chosen by birth, nor by privilege, but by battle. Only the fiercest, the most unyielding, and the most relentless warriors survived long enough to earn the right to command. They were not leaders who watched from the safety of marble palaces. They bled beside their men. They killed beside their men, and when needed, they died beside their men. To the legionaries, a centurion was more than a commander. He was the embodiment of discipline and fear. His voice could silence chaos. His orders were law carved in steel. When he raised his hand, thousands moved as one. But to earn such power came a price. The training of a centurion was a crucible of pain. He was forged not in the quiet halls of academies, but in the roar of battle, the clash of shields, and the cries of the dying. To rise through the ranks, a soldier faced endless drills, brutal marches, and relentless combat, until his instincts were sharpened beyond reason, and his body hardened like iron. And yet, what made the centurion feared was not his strength of arm, it was his unyielding authority. In the Roman legions, discipline was survival. Cowardice was punished by death, disobedience by the whip. A single man's hesitation could doom an entire formation, and the centurion made certain such weakness did with his vine staff in hand. A symbol of command and punishment, he enforced Rome's will without question, without hesitation, and without mercy. But a centurion was no tyrant hiding behind power. He earned respect the only way Rome understood it, through blood. In battle, they led from the front, the first to charge when the horns of war sounded. Their crested helmets rose high above the ranks, making them visible targets to the enemy, and yet they never faltered, never hid. To kill a centurion was to shatter Roman morale, which is why the centurion fought harder than any man alive. Legends tell of centurions standing their ground against impossible odds. At Alesia, when Caesar's forces faced annihilation, it was the centurions who rallied the broken lines, holding the walls when all seemed lost. At Pharsalus, when chaos tore through the ranks, they became steel pillars amid the storm, turning disaster into victory. Every victory Rome ever carved into history bore the blood of centurions, but fear was their greatest weapon. The enemies of Rome knew the sight of those plumed helmets meant only one thing: an unbreakable will, advancing without pause. Tribes fled at their approach. Kingdoms surrendered before a single stroke. For where the centurions led, Rome followed, and Rome never stopped. And yet, behind the power and the glory, there was sacrifice. Centurions were the first to fight, and the first to fall. Their names rarely echoed in the Senate's marble halls. Their statues were few, their triumphs claimed by emperors and generals who never bled on the front lines. But on the battlefield, among the mud, the fire, and the screams, every soldier knew the truth. Without the centurions, there was no Rome. They were the silent architects of conquest, the living embodiment of discipline, courage, and brutality. For centuries, their legacy endured, carried on the steel tips of Roman spears and the blood-soaked banners of the empire. And even now, millennia later, their shadows stretch across history, reminding us of a simple, brutal truth. Empires rise on the shoulders of warriors, but they survive only on the backs of their centurions. These were not just commanders. They were Rome's iron heart, and to face them on the battlefield was to face the wrath of an empire. In the heart of the Roman Empire, beneath the roar of the Colosseum, beyond the marble palaces and endless roads, there lived men who became legends carved in blood. They were the gladiators who faced death beneath the blinding sun, the Praetorian Guards who whispered in the ears of emperors, the legionaries whose shields thundered across continents, the Sicarii who struck like shadows in the night, and the Centurions, Rome's iron spine. The warriors upon whom empires were built. Different paths, different battles. But one thing bound them together, fear, not fear of death. No, fear itself became their weapon. These were men who walked willingly into the jaws of oblivion, who stared into the abyss and refused to blink. To their enemies, they were nightmares. To Rome, they were instruments of destiny. And yet, the sands of time buried their names. Their blood dried, their bones turned to dust beneath the ruins of an empire that believed it would last forever. But history remembers the whispers it do. And when we speak their stories, when we breathe life into their battles, the ghosts of Rome awaken once more. Because this is not just history. This is power. This is sacrifice. This is what it means to become feared and unforgettable. Pause, then intensely. And if the echoes of Rome still thunder in your heart, if you want to stand where gladiators pledged, ignorance marched, and where assassins struck from the shadows, then this is only the beginning. Join me, subscribe, like, share this with those who crave the untold truths of history. Because the story of Rome is not finished, and the next battle is coming.